Hello and welcome to the X Frontend Bootcamp 1.0. Now that we know how the web works, how can we now create those static files that could be actually served and interpreted by the browser? For that, we have chosen a simple project for us to build today. And in this project, we are going to learn a lot about HTML and also about CSS. We're also going to be learning a few tricks that as you proceed, you are going to be using in your project. I'm Israel from Xeraxlabs and I will be your instructor for today. Without wasting more time, let us quickly start. Now, we know that a website is just a simple folder on a resource server somewhere that serves us with static files. So let's quickly create a folder that is going to house our static files. So I'm just going to right click, and on my desktop, I'm going to click new and say new folder. But if you don't have this option, there's actually a shortcut. And the shortcut is just pressing Ctrl Shift and N on your keyboard. And if you do that, you should automatically see something popping up right here for you that says new folder. So we are going to rename this to whatever name that you want. But for me, I'm going to just name it as DX cards. So I'm just going to say DX cards. Now, do you need to push this dash whenever you want to start a project? The big answer is totally no. So all I need to do now, it's now open inside of this folder, and this is going to be the place that we are going to be creating the static files. So what I need to do now is I can right click anywhere inside of here, and then I'm going to see an option that says open with Visual Studio Code. But if yours is not showing this option, that means a few options weren't selected during the installation of Visual Studio Code. You need not to panic. If you click open with code, it is going to open this environment, this Visual Studio Code environment. For the first time that we actually open our Visual Studio Code, it's going to ask if we actually trust the authors. So just click trust the authors and say yes, I trust the authors. Now the next thing we're going to do is you're going to realize that this guy is now showing that you have opened the X folder just right in here. But quickly, for people that don't have that option on their screen, I'm just going to close this off and then close our previous Visual Studio Code instance that was open earlier on. All you need to do is you just need to go back and open your Visual Studio Code from your desktop. So we are now going to open this folder inside of Visual Studio Code, and that is going to make it easier for you if you don't have that option. But if you have that option on your system, well, that is all good and fine. In order for me to open that folder, all I need to do is come over here to File and click File, then click Open Folder. If I do that, it is going to automatically open this guy up, and I'm going to have an option to navigate right to where that file is. But for the most part, the file is in desktop, and then the name of that folder is called DX cards. So I'm just going to select that folder, and then it should open and just have that same nice look as people that did it using the shortcut by just right clicking inside of that empty folder and saying open with code. So we are now on the same page. Now remember, when we discussed about the static files that were served, we made mention of a few guys. We made mention of a HTML file, a CSS file, and a JavaScript file. Well, let us proceed right through by creating one of those guys, which is the index.html file. So I'm just going to right click anywhere inside of here and say new file. And right inside of here, I'm going to create a file named index.html. Now, ensure that this is having a dot, or you're going to be having issues with previewing this file. So I'm just going to press enter. So this is index.html file. Now, does it mean that we only need to limit ourselves to index.html? The answer is no. You can totally have several pages on your website, and you're going to consider naming them accordingly to those pages. But it is just important that you have an index.html file which every web crawler is going to find in your page in order to serve. It is important to have index.html file in your page, as it is going to help web servers in order to locate the particular default file or the first file inside of your project. So without wasting more time, let us go back to our folder, and you should see something happening now. If we go back to our folder that we opened earlier, you're going to realize that inside of here, something has magically been created, and that guy is the index.html. So how can we transform this blank looking page into creating something as awesome as this? The first thing I want to drag our attention to is, if you hover right to the top here, you're going to see that you have something that pops up there and say DX card, and is showing the particular website address. Now, if I come back to my HTML file, I want to bring in an HTML boilerplate. To bring in an HTML boilerplate, all you need to do is press Shift key and press 1 on your keyboard just to bring this exclamation mark. And if you do that, you're automatically going to see this suggestion on your screen. All you need to do is come over here and press this first one, and you're going to see a lot of guys here generated for you. You do not need to worry about who these guys are yet. We are going to be explaining and talking about them in a bit. Now, if I save this file and I come back to my folder, all I need to do is just double click on this file, or for some people, this won't be showing as with Chrome yet. So all you need to do is you need to just right click on it, and then you say open with, and then you choose Google Chrome. So if I do that now, you can see it's asking me how do I want to continue opening my HTML files. You can choose to tick this as always open HTML files with Google Chrome. So I'm just going to click OK, and that should load up the page. Now you're going to see something happening here. Now, this is just the basic look of how a web page looks like. Well, just some basic canvas, and these guys are looking all nice and good. I know you must be smiling at yourself now that this doesn't look anywhere near good. But this is the blank page that we are going to be working on in order to transform it to awesome looking things as this. But it is important we understand the very basics before we start diving into working with smart and beautiful looking things as this, where we are going to be talking about working with images and how to work better with buttons. So let us quickly move to one part that I am most excited about. Now, if I hover over the top of this particular page, you are going to see something that says document. But if you look at the project that we are trying to build, that guy says DX card. So one way we could actually make content to show at the top of our web page is actually using and writing in between the title HTML tags. In a moment, we're going to be discussing about HTML tags. So inside of here, inside of this long looking thing, you should just come in here and change this document to anything. You could change it to maybe your name, but for me, I'm just going to stick to the X cards. All you need to do next is come over here and say file, and then save your work. Always ensure you save your work. Then come back to your particular web browser and see if I hover over this, nothing has changed. It's still showing that same old boring document name in there. But if I reload now, notice what is going to happen. Now that guy has been changed to DX card. I hope you're excited about that already. Now let's move to the second part. Now, if for some reason you have not indicated the index dot or a particular name that you have chosen and .html, you won't be able to use that mnet abbreviation of exclamation mark that we used earlier. So what then are HTML tags? Well, to put it simple, HTML tag is just a piece of markup that indicates the beginning and the end of an HTML element. Now, you're going to notice something. You're going to notice that this guy called title right here, it's actually the same name, but it is starting with something that is looking so interesting. A less than symbol, and then the word, and then it's having a greater than symbol closing him, and that guy is wrapping around one particular content right inside of here. And these guys are called opening tags simply because they do not have this / inside of them, and these guys are called closing tag simply because of this slash that is here. And in a moment, you're going to see us using a lot of HTML tags. But it is important we understand what exactly is an HTML element. Remember, we said that an HTML tag is simply just a piece that indicates the beginning and the end of an HTML element, right? So an HTML element is simply a component of a HTML document that tells the browser how to structure and interpret a particular part of our HTML document. Well, that is big English. How can we actually utilize it? In order to create our first HTML tag, I'm going to start with a tag called a section. So I start with a less than, and then I type in the particular name that is specific to that HTML tag, and then I'll close that. But you're going to notice something that happens immediately. Visual Studio Code helps us to end and close that particular tag that we have opened. So anything in between here is going to be the content of that particular HTML tag, right? So this now makes a complete HTML element. Like we said, a HTML element, it's the component of a HTML document that tells the browser how to structure or interpret a particular part of our code. If I save this and I come here and reload, you're only going to see one little guy right on our screen that says content. In order to give this our HTML element a design, we use something called CSS, and that is the short form for what is known as the cascading style sheet. So how do we use that guy in our project? Now we want to simply see how we could style this guy. So to do that, I'm just quickly going to go right in and then create a new file that I'm going to call style.css. Please note, you are totally non-limited to whatever name that you are going to give it. You can call it Agbado, you can call it Yam, or you can call it even your name. But it is just important that you ensure that you can easily remember that name and it's ending with .css. Well, how do we use CSS inside of our page? Well, now I have a section which is a block level element, and we're going to see what that guy is in a moment. If I come to my code and I want to select this particular guy that I've written now, how do I do it? In order to do this, I can use something in CSS called selection by tag, since this guy is the only section that I have on my page. I'm going to come to my CSS and say selection by tag. But before then, I want to quickly tell us and introduce us to the general CSS syntax. So for the general CSS syntax, we have a selector, and then after the selector, we have a coily opening bracket and a coily closing bracket. And inside of that coily opening bracket and coily closing bracket, we have a property of our choice, and then a column, then a particular value that we want, and we end that with a semicolon. So this is the basic structure of how a CSS file looks like. Now, if you are wondering how you can actually get this particular symbol, please, you can quickly just look at your keyboard, and then you are going to see a place where this curly bracket is indicated on your keyboard. And then when you press your shift key, it's going to be easier for you to press that particular key and bring it right inside of your project. Okay, now quickly before we proceed, I want to talk about commenting a particular block of code. Now, if I come back to my HTML, you are going to see something happening here. Well, we have a content on our page. If I come here and I reload, we're clearly seeing that content. But what if for some reason I don't want the user to actually see this content that I've written? All I do is I need to comment out this particular code. And to comment in HTML is actually easy. All I need to do is start with an opening angular bracket. I start with to comment in HTML is really very easy. All I need to do is start with an opening angular bracket and then an exclamation mark with double dots, and then I can put any right contents here in order to be commented. So I'm just going to say this is a comment. Now if I save this, if I come to my page and I reload, you're certainly not going to see that particular write-up that I have made. But there's actually a shortcut to get right here, and the shortcut is you do not need to memorize this guy, but you only need to understand that this is the basic syntax that we used in commenting out a particular code out in our HTML page. Well, the shortcut to introducing this guy inside of our project is just going on that particular line, and then we'll press Ctrl key and / on our keyboard. And you can see immediately it wrapped that particular line inside of that comment. So if I save my file now and I go back and reload, you're going to see that we won't see this comment again. So now, what is the use of this particular comment that we have learned how to use in HTML? Well, maybe for some reason you don't want a particular section of code to show, or maybe for some reason you just want to create a write-up or a strict documentation inside of your HTML, so that maybe when you are looking at this code 200 years to come, you'll be able to understand what you have done here. Or maybe you are trying to leave a note for a programmer that is going to come on this project and start working on it. This is actually the best thing to do by learning to leave comments inside of your code. So I'm just going to come here, and if I press Ctrl / my page on that particular line, it is going to remove that comment from this particular HTML element. So I'm just going to move right next to saving this, and if I come here and I reload, now I can now see the content. So let's go right to our CSS and use that little trick that we have learned. So in CSS, commenting a code out is actually done in a different way. But in order not to bore you with a whole lot of talking, I'm just going to come right over here, and I'm just going to leave a comment right inside of here that says basic CSS declaration. Oops, I have a misspelling there. This declaration. Okay, so all I need to do is just select this guy and then press my Ctrl / and that is automatically going to comment that line of code for me. So now, what then is a selector in CSS? Well, just put it in a simple way. A selector is what we use in actually selecting particular HTML elements directly. Let's say now I want to style this content now. I now know that this guy is wrapped inside of an HTML tag called section. Now, for me to be able to style this particular content, I need to reference this section in my CSS and then apply a particular styling that I want. For the main part, I'm just going to select this particular line, And this selection we are doing is called a selection by tag. A selection by tag, we mean we are just copying that HTML tag name and then we are pasting it in CSS and then we are giving it a particular styling of our choice. So what are the styles that I want to give to this guy? So remember, this is still following the basic CSS declaration syntax. So which is after my selector, I open an angular bracket and I close that angular bracket. So inside, I'm going to specify a property and a value that I want to actually happen. Well, let's say for the first part, the first thing I want to do is I want the color of this guy to change to a tomato looking color. All I need to do is come here and say I want to target only the color of that particular content and I want it to have a color of tomato. Now you might be wondering where is the tomato coming from, but at least you are familiar with the color, right? And then when we say color and we give it a property in CSS, it is automatically going to apply that to the text that is being wrapped in that HTML element. But if I save this now and I come here and reload, this is not going to work. And yes, it is just like in your workplace, you have a boss that actually tells you about a new project and then you can easily hit to him and work on that project. But someone coming from external, from somewhere else and is now telling you about a project that you need to work on, you're not really going to answer him. So let's tell HTML that there's a guy called CSS in town that we have actually created. In order for us to do that, all we need to do is come right under this title and then we start typing link. Now we start typing that, it is actually going to bring an Mnet abbreviation for you, and all you need to do is just click it and it is going to generate this long line of code. Well, you don't need to panic. As you continue practicing, you get yourself familiar with these guys for the most part. Now, all I need to do is whatever name you have given to this file, you need to write it inside of this hyperreference that is here. So for me, I've named it style.css and I'm going to quickly do that right inside of here. So I'm going to say style.css. As you start typing, you're going to see that that guy has Visual Studio Code has suggested it for you already. So you could press enter on your keyboard and that is going to actually keep it there. So I'm going to save my code, and if I come back and I reload now, I should see this color changing to a tomato color. So if I reload that, did it work? Yes, of course it worked. Now let us take this a step further. Our goal is how we can be able to create this nice looking cards. So how do we basically do that? Well, first, it is important for us to understand how we can actually work with width and particular height. For the most part, I'm just going to come right here, and remember we wrapped this guy inside of a section, and we want to give that section now a height, and we want to give it a background so that it's going to be easier for you to actually see what is actually in here. So for me, I'm just going to come right inside of my CSS, and then the property I want to give to this particular section now is called the background property. So I want to change the background to something as ugly as just black, right? So I'm just going to type in black there, and if I save this, if I come here and reload, you're going to see something happening here, that this content is going to have a background. But now you might have been wondering that why is this guy extending to the entire width of the screen instead of just wrapping this little content that it has inside of here? Well, this behavior is simply caused simply because this particular tag that we have used is a block level element. Now we are going to still be understanding what block level elements are in a moment. So I'm just going to type this here so that it's easier for you to quickly check. So it's a block level element. So what are block level elements? Well, simply place close quote. block level elements are elements that occupy the entire width of the container, right? They are placed in. Now you could see we didn't specify a width for him, but he automatically went ahead to take the entire width of this particular container. So how do we address that? First, we could use a specific CSS property called width in order to make that guy adjust like we want. So I'm just going to come here and say width, and I'm going to make that width something like 80% for now, which we are going to be changing later. If I save this, notice what is going to happen. It is going to automatically calculate the width of the parent element, and it is going to take only 80% of that particular width. Well, this guy is still looking much boring. Maybe we should give it a height so that we can be able to see it looking even nice and better. So I'm just going to come right inside of here, and remember we are still styling this section, right? So I'm just going to come right inside of here. Remember, we understand what a width does. We now understand what a background does and what a color does. The color affects the text. So I'm just going to come here and introduce a height of 200 px. If I save this, if I come here and I reload, you're going to notice what is going to happen now. This guy is going to automatically have a height of the 200 px that we gave him. But now this becomes a problem. Now the problem, just like you might have suspect, is this guy is only starting to the left of the page, and it is not perfectly at the center of this page. Now if you look at this particular design, you are going to notice that we did a trick. Now what did we do that make these guys to actually perfectly occupy and stay in the center of this particular web page? Looking at the left, that the same spacing that was left to the left side is the same spacing that we have at the right side. So how do we make this work? To do that, we used a simple trick in CSS, and this trick only works on block level elements. Now to do this trick, I'm simply just going to come here and write margin. I'm going to write margin, and then I'm just going to say 0 for top and bottom and leave a space, and then type in auto. What this is going to do is this. I'm going to save my work, Ctrl S on my keyboard. What this is going to do is this. It is going to automatically calculate the margin to the right and the margin to the left, and it is going to spread them evenly for this particular section that we have. And remember, this only works on block level element. So if I reload now, you are going to see a magic that is going to happen, and that magic is this guy is now perfectly to the center of the page. Well, this has been quite a lot of things to handle. Now you might be asking yourself, do you really need to memorize all this? Well, for the most part, the answer is no. You only need to know that these guys exist, and then you know how to actually use them. Now you're going to see that CSS has really made it easy, that almost most of the properties that you are familiar with are what are introduced. You're familiar with the width, you're familiar with the height, you're familiar with the background and what the color is. The only thing that looks strange here is a margin, and we are going to be talking about that guy in large extent when we start talking about the box model. So, well, we now have a page looking good and awesome. And just as you might have suspect, this guy is going to be the container that is going to house these guys, that is going to make them look like they are perfectly in the center of the page. Now, whenever you see something staying perfectly at the center of the page, you might want to consider using this trick for the most part. So if you look at this design, you see us using that trick almost over and over. So this guy is actually staying just right in the middle of the page and is not occupying the full width. So we're going to come back to our code and let's see how we could actually work with these guys. How can we have contents that actually have a background and cool stuff? Well, you might be tempted to just go right inside of your HTML and say, well, and now I know how a section works and I just want to type my text, and my text is going to easily show on my page. Yes, of course, you are certainly right. If I come here and I start typing lorem, it is going to generate a lot of dummy text for me. So just click this whenever it starts generating. Now you're going to see another thing that happens on our page. Our code is taking us to where we don't know. Now, whenever you have issues like this, you do not need to panic. All you need to do is click inside of here and press Ctrl A on your keyboard, and it is automatically going to select everything. Now come to view and then toggle on your word wrap. And when you do that, you're going to see that it's no longer going to be breaking outside of the particular screen size that you have specified. Now, for the most part, sometimes you might feel that, well, this guy is now hidden. That is certainly nothing to worry about, because you can always press this guy and bring that guy back. Okay, that is enough chant. Let us quickly preview what this actually does. All I'm going to do is I'm going to press Ctrl S on my keyboard, and if I go back and I come here and reload, you're going to see that, well, even though this is looking awesome, it is still looking ugly in some parts. So how do I transform this particular guy into these guys that are right here? Well, you might be tempted to say, well, all I need to do is target lorem ipsum inside of my CSS. And doing this is actually going to be boring. Imagine selecting this whole text and then you come to CSS to paste them. Secondly, it's still not going to work. So in order for us to do this, we have to make this an HTML element, right? Which is going to make it easier for us to select and style the particular content that are inside of that HTML element. So remember, when we talked about HTML elements, we said it is just a simple component in an HTML document that tells the browser how to structure and how to interpret that part of an HTML document. Well, for now, we just have a random text, and the browser can't really tell what this text is because it only has meaning to you. So let us put this guy inside of an HTML tag to make it an HTML element. Well, we have length of one HTML tag, and then we are going to learn about another HTML tag now called the div. So in order to start typing the div, all you need to do is just type div on your keyboard, and then if you're worried about starting with the opening angular bracket and closing angular bracket, just click on this Mnet abbreviation there, and it's automatically going to generate this particular block for you. So all you want to do is this: you want to write the content of your HTML element inside of the opening tag and the closing tag, just like we have rightly identified. So all I need to do is come inside of here. I know that this is where my content of my HTML element is going to be, in between the opening tag and the closing tag. So you are now going to just cut this and then you paste it inside of here, right? So you right click and say paste, and that is going to work. But well, if you can use, there's also a shorter approach that we could do. Instead of going that way, we could actually just select it all and drag it. So we'll click and drag inside of there. But if you're not confident about this, please just stick to the cutting and pasting, and everything is still all good and fine. Well, if I save this file, if I come here and reload, we're still going to have a problem. If I reload, you are going to notice, well, I told you that we are going to be able to structure this particular write-up, and yes, of course we did, but this is not still looking as awesome as you had expected. Well, in order to make this guy look awesome, one of the things we need to do is we need to style him in CSS. So how do we do that? The first thing we need to do is give him a background, and then we can now play around with the width, and everything should be looking just as fine. So as you might have quickly suspected, we are going to be copying this name, which is the div. Remember, this is selection by tag. So I'm just going to paste that div name, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to open my curly bracket and my closing curly bracket. And right inside of there, I just want to give it a background of tomato. If I save that, if I come here and I reload, you're going to see something interesting that is happening. That now, initially, I couldn't style this text for themselves and give them a particular styling that I want. But now that I place them inside of an HTML tag, they have now become an HTML element, and then it's easier for me to style them by addressing their parent tag. Well, maybe I don't like how long this guy is looking. So just as you might have guessed, this division is also a block level element simply because it occupied the entire width of the parent container it is placed in. So next, what we need to do is we need to define a particular width for him. And for the best case, I'm going to give it a width of 280 px. If I save this, if I come here and I reload, you're going to see something magically happening here. And what is magically happening is that this guy is actually now having that particular width that we want. Well, this in a way is starting to look as awesome as what we want here. But we are still a lot of work ahead. So what do we do next? How do we create this nice spacing in between the content and the inner edges of the parent? Well, to do that, you can see that this text is actually sticking to the edge of the parent container. How do we do that? In order to separate them, what we use is something called a padding. I do not expect you to understand this yet, but by continuous practice, you are going to know what exactly this guy does. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in 20px right inside of here. By 20px, what I mean is this. It is going to give it a padding of 20 pixels. Now, this px simply means pixels. Now, you could see that we use percentage here, and in some places we are using pixels. We are still going to be talking about that guy in full details. If I save this and I come here and reload, you're going to see that, well, now we have that nice looking spacing in between the parent and the content that is inside of the parent. Well, what if we want to have two other more nice looking divisions right inside of there? Well, what we could actually do is come to our HTML and maybe duplicate this line of code, since it's the same thing that we want over. To duplicate, one way I can do this, I can just select it all, right click and say copy, then come down here, right click and say paste. If I save that guy and I come here and reload, you're going to notice something that is going to happen. Now we are going to be having two divisions, but there's going to be one problem. If I reload, we are going to see that, well, now we have another division, but we have a problem. One of those problems is this guy is automatically inheriting the properties that you have declared for all divisions. And the second problem that we have here is this, that this guy is not agreeing to stay on the same line with this other division that is right off here. So how do we correct that? In order to correct that, what we need to do is this. We could actually target these particular divisions for themselves and give them the different background colors that we want. How do we do that? To do that, we introduce something called HTML attribute. And the HTML attribute we are going to be starting with is called a class. So a class HTML attribute is just a simple write-up that, how did I get here? Well, all I did was I started typing class, and when Visual Studio Code suggested that, I just selected it. Now, what is the next thing that I want to do? Well, I just want to give this a class name of my choice that is going to make it easier for me to be able to identify and differentiate this division from this other division. So right inside of here, I'm going to call this the second div because it is actually the second div. So mind you, whenever you are typing that particular class, since it's a single name, you can just separate it with this guy, or you can write it together. When you leave a space in between a class name, that means you are declaring two classes inside of here. So all we are going to do is we're just going to stick this guy together or separate them with a dash. Either way, it still works. And right inside of here too, I'm going to give that guy a class, and I'm going to call him the first div, right? So first dash div. So if I save this, if I come here and I reload, well, nothing is still going to happen. The only thing we have done is we have just given these particular guys an identification that whenever we want to select them, it's going to be easier for us to select. And now what really happened when we select by tag is this: any tag that has any HTML tag that has this name of div is automatically going to have this CSS property applied to them. But well, I'm interested in my width and my padding, but I want to do away with this tomato color now, background color. So I'm just going to comment that by using Ctrl//, and if I save this, if I come here and reload, all the division are now no longer going to have a particular background. So I want to start targeting these guys individually in order for me to give them the background that I want. So I'm just going to come right inside of here, and I'm going to come in my HTML, and I will copy this guy out, this particular HTML attributes that I've given here that is called a class. Well, someone might ask, if I know this, why can't I just type it inside of my CSS? Well, you can, but by convention, when you copy that, you minimize the errors in your code. So, but for us to select this guy now, notice if we just come here and say first div, and then we want it to have a background of tomato, you are going to see that this is not going to work. If I save this, I come here and I reload, this is not going to work. And that is simply because this guy has an attribute of class. So to select classes in CSS, I will have to start that right up with a dot. So this is going to bring me to my mini subheading right here, which is selecting by class. So if I save this, if I come here and reload now, the first guy is going to have a background color of tomato. And yes, we have it. This guy is having a background color of tomato. So you might quickly want to try it for this second div. You might try giving it a background color of your choice. Okay, so let us do it together now. I believe you have tried that. Now, when I pause in order to give you opportunities to predict what we want to do next, this is actually going to help you be able to memorize a few things and understand the concept in the particular lecture. I'm going to come to my style.css, and just like you might have suspected, yes, I'm going to start with a dot, and then I'm going to write that second div. So I'm going to start with an opening bracket and a closing bracket. Let me separate this from this so it doesn't look like they are together. So the only thing I want to do is I want to give it a background. But well, in this case, I want to use a simple ash color. Now, you might see me typing this. Did I actually memorize this? The big answer is no, I didn't memorize this. This is actually just a color code, which is a naming convention from somewhere that I just copied right into my code. Because in China, you might want to ask for a tomato color from a Chinese man, and then he might not be understanding what exactly you are talking about. So that is why a naming convention for colors were brought into play, and this is just one of the naming convention, hex code. So I'm just going to save this, come here and reload. And yes, you're going to see that this guy automatically has that nice looking background for him. Well, let's quickly proceed by creating the third guy, and all I need to do is this. One way we could do that instead of copying and pasting is just select it all, starting from the opening tag and the closing tag, and just press Shift Alternate down on your keyboard, and it's automatically going to duplicate that line. But please, when you duplicate, ensure that the opening tag and the closing tag is just right inside there. Now look at what is going to happen. Because this guy has the second div class attached to him, if I reload, you're automatically going to see that that third division that we're going to have here is going to have a background of this nice ash color. So if I reload, yes, you can see. And this is simply because it has this particular class name attached to it. But let's change that in a moment. And when we change that, we want to change this particular look right now. So instead of using classes now, I want us to use an HTML attribute called IDs. Now, what exactly is the difference between this class and an ID? Well, a class can be reused over and over in your code, but by convention, an ID is meant to represent a unique naming for a particular HTML element on your web page. So an ID can only be one on your page. So I'm just quickly going to name this as third div. Oops, that's a lot of spelling error. So I'm just going to call it third div. It doesn't matter. You can decide to join it together without using this separation here. So I'm just going to select that guy. And if I save and copy him, if I come to my CSS, we need to understand something important, which is selecting by ID. So selecting by ID. So remember now, we're able to start right off by selecting with tags, and then we started also by selecting by classes. Let us see how we can select by ID. Well, you might be tempted to say you want to start with a dot now, and you want to give that guy a background of sky blue, but I'm going to use a hex code called #008 BF5. That is actually a hex code I copied from somewhere. You don't have to memorize this particular hex code. If you know the name of the color, fine, you can quickly enter it. But if you do not know the name, you can quickly look up for that particular hex code online, and it's going to be readily available. And we are going to be changing this guy in a moment so you can see how that guy works. So if I save this now, my code is not going to work. And the simple reason is because I have selected by ID wrongly. So what is happening here? What is happening is that for IDs, I do not start with a dot, but I start with hash. And hash on my keyboard could be found by Shift 3. So if I save this guy now, I come here and I reload, this should be looking just as awesome. Now, with this project, you have been able to understand how to select by ID, how to select by tag, how to select by ID, how to select by classes. With this little project, you have been able to learn about the basic CSS declaration. You have been able to learn how to select by tags, and you have also been able to learn how to select by classes and how to select by ID. Let us take this a bit further. Now we have an issue on our page. Now, just like we discussed, block level element automatically occupies the entire width of the container they are placed in. But we have a problem now. These guys are not staying on one line even though we have reduced their width. How do we fix this issue? Well, one fix is to come on each of them and say display inline, and then they are going to display inline. Well, what are inline level elements? Inline level elements are just elements that only occupy the width required by the contents of their code. Well, what are inline level elements? Inline level elements are simply just elements that only occupy the width required by their children. And we are going to see an example when we start working on this awesome project. We are going to see how we are going to create an inline level element that we are going to style uniquely, and you're going to see that these guys are actually on one line, but there's a trick we did here. We added an inline level element and styled that inline level element uniquely. So I'm just going to come back right in here, and then inside of here I'm going to do something interesting. Well, if we just jump right in and say display inline block to display inline to these three guys, we're going to have a problem. It's not going to be responding to a few tricks that we have added. So one of the best way we could actually do is just make them display inline block. So I'm going to give that to the division. Remember, the division is going to apply it to the three of them. So I'm just going to say display inline dash block. You see, it automatically suggested that. So if I save that, if I come here and reload, magically now you are going to see that these three guys are going to be staying on one line. Well, this is looking halfway like what we have here, or we have a few constraints now. Now the few constraints is, how do I make these guys perfectly stay in the center of the page? Well, just as you have suspected, what we intend to achieve is this. We already have one container that we have spaced out in order to stay right perfectly in the center. We can make this container the parent of these three divisions we have, and then if we hide the background, it's going to look like these guys are actually in the center of the page. So I'm just going to come back here, and then I'm going to do that trick inside of my HTML. So this is what we are going to be doing in our HTML. So I'm going to reduce this so that it's going to be so tiny. So what we want to do is this. We want to move these three divisions. We want to move them inside of this section so that they are now content inside of our section. So to do that, I'm simply just going to press this down, right? And I'm going to do away with this content that was just there in order for us to see how that guy works. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this whole thing, and I will right click and say cut, right? So let me zoom that guy back. So if I cut it, there's actually nothing on my page except for this awesome looking section, and inside of it you can leave enough space. I'm just going to paste those three guys. So see, I copied everything properly without having to leave out a tag, or you are going to have certain issues in your code. So if I save this, if I come here and I reload, well, you are going to notice one thing. The first is, remember, for that parent section, we gave it a color of tomato, right? So if I come here and reload, you're going to see that these guys are going to be inside of the parent. But notice what is automatically being applied, right? Because we gave the parent a color, now the children are also inheriting that trend. So all I need to do is come back to my code and just comment that particular color out of my section tag. So if I save this, if I come here and I reload, they are going to come back to the default black. But then we have a problem. And what is that problem? Well, one of the problem is that these particular items are not staying in the center of this particular section. How do we fix that issue? To make you see that better, I'm going to increase this width to 90%. So if I save this, if I come here and I reload, at least now you can see that this content that we have added, the first div, second div, and third div, are not staying in the center of this element. How do we fix that issue? Well, to fix that issue, we are just going to come here, and inside of the section, we are just going to say text align, text dash align, and we are going to say center. So remember, we are doing this now inside of the parent section, right? So in the section, we say text align center, and if I save this, if I come here and I reload, you are automatically going to see that these three guys are going to be in the center of the page. But we also have another issue. You can see that the content inside of the child too, they automatically shrink to the particular center. But now we still have another concern that we need to look at. And what is that concern? Well, the concern is just for the fact that we have given a fixed height here, and a fixed height is not advisable for the most part. So we're just going to do away with the height that we give to our particular section so that we don't have a fixed height. So if I comment this out and I save, if I come here and I reload, you're going to see that that guy is only going to hog the contents of the container. So if I do something interesting, like say, okay, maybe I reduce the size of this browser, I can be able to navigate right and have it stretch right and be responsive. But well, something is happening here now. And what is that thing happening? I can now still see the background that I gave to my parent element. How do I do away with that? But before we do away with that in a moment, I want to quickly explain a few things. And what is those few things that we want to talk about? We are going to see them in a moment. So first, you are going to see that in our main design, it looks like this guy have some nice spacing right up and down here. Well, the trick is just the same. This guy is a parent and it has content, and we want to actually space those contents properly. How do we do that? We just come here and use the padding that we used earlier. So remember, we use something called the padding. So if I do that and give it the same 20px, if I save this, I come here and reload, you're going to see that it's going to create this nice space between the inner edges of the parent to the children content. But now, someone looking at our web page is going to see that this guy is actually looking so ugly. So how do we do that? All we need to do is come here and comment out the background. So if we comment out this background that we give to our section and we save, we're going to see that this guy is going to be looking just perfectly arranged in the center. Well, I know this has been quite a journey, and I know you might have been exhausted and you might be thinking, do you need to actually cram all this? Well, the answer is no. And for the most part, you will realize that we have only talked about basically 5 to 6 HTML CSS properties. And what are they? We talk about width, we talk about background, we talked about margin, we talked about width, right? We talked about padding, we talked about margin, and we talked about text align property. We talked about the background property, and we basically talked about the color property. So if you see, basically all we have done is a repetition of these 6 CSS properties. Gave a background, and also we talked about the display property. So basically you have just been introduced to 7 CSS properties. So this is going to be what we are going to be using continuously in our program. We're going to see that we're going to be using the width almost all the time and padding for the most case. Now let's quickly move to something interesting. Well, we have created this particular application, and if you check this in a mobile mode, you're going to see that this particular project is responsive. But let me tell you what is actually happening in a moment. If I right click here and I say inspect, now when we inspect, we actually want to preview it on a certain device. For some people, this guy is going to be in the bottom of the page. You do not need to panic. All you need to do is click this 3 dotted guy right inside of here. If you click it, you can choose it to be at the bottom of your page, or you can click it and choose it to be at the right side. But for us, we want it to be at the right side, so we have specifically placed it at the right side. Next, you can proceed by coming to click this option right here that looks like a mobile and a tablet device. If you click this, it is automatically going to show it in the particular mode that you have chosen. So if I choose to preview this site on a Samsung Galaxy S20, this is what I'm going to have. If I choose to preview this on an iPad mini, this is what I'm going to have. I can choose to keep testing it on different devices, and generally I can tell you that this actually looks good. But what exactly is happening here? Let me close this in a moment. Now remember, we have made this guy to display as inline block level element. So what happens is this: inline block level elements only occupy a space that is available for them. So as you continue to shrink the browser, whenever there's not enough space for this 280px division to stay, it is going to automatically break to the next line. And this is what we have. Well, now we have only created this project on our local machine. How do we now host it so that we can give our friends a link to this project and they can be able to see what we have built? Well, in order to do that, remember at the starting of the program, we created an account on netlify.com. So we're just going to navigate to netlify.com, which is going to help us to host our project for free. I'm just going to click login, and then I'm going to log in with that details that I have created, I used in creating my account. But remember, for me, I use the email, so I'm going to click email, and this time I'm going to be logging in with my email. So I'm just going to quickly enter that, and I'm going to enter my password, and that should take me in. Okay, so now inside of my Netlify. Now, for the most part, you are going to see an option that looks just odd here because you haven't hosted other projects. So what we are going to do is you're going to click on add a new site, and you're going to choose deploy manually. But well, for some users, you are going to see that on your page, it's totally going to be different from mine, right? But one thing that is so certain is you're going to see an option to actually paste that particular file that you want. So now you are going to see it here. It's asking for us to drag and drop our project folder that contains our HTML, CSS, or including our JavaScript file. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to open this folder, go back to my desktop, right? So I can copy that entire folder. So I'm just going to select it and then drag it just over to this particular place. And you can see it's asking me to drop it. And if I leave it there, it's going to show that it's uploading that. But well, for some people, this is the first page you are going to be greeted with. And then you're going to see an option to actually deploy your site manually. Do not panic. It is just the same method. Now, all I need to do is I'm going to reload my page, and then you're going to see that automatically I'm going to be giving a link here that I can share with anybody in order to view my page. So if I click this long link here, you are going to see that it is going to open a particular web address now that is live and is hosting that particular code that I've written. But what if I don't want this long name? There's actually a workaround to that. What I can do is this. Just back to my Netlify dashboard, I can click on domain settings, and I can come here and say option and click edit site name. So if I do that, I'm going to have an option to remove this long name, and then I can type whatever I want. I can name that as DX1 cards, and right on, this is actually available. And that is the main reason why it is not popping an error. Maybe if I choose something or a name that has already been taken, it is going to tell me that that name has already been taken. So if I intend to do something like maybe our food blog project now, and I do it as DX1 food blog, it should pop up an error that this has already been taken. So well, but as you proceed, you are going to see this error. So let's just name this back to card. If you have that error, simply just change the name to something that is easier for you to relate to. So I'm just going to save this. And if I save that now, this site is going to be live at dx1-card.netlify.app. So if I right click and I say open a new tab, it is going to give me an option to actually open that in a new tab. So now let's talk about a bit. For some people, you are not going to be seeing that option because you haven't created any, you haven't deployed any site. But what you are going to see is you are going to see this option that says drag and drop your website or browse to upload. If you see this is actually still good. So you can say drag and drop this particular folder to that particular place, and then it's going to still host your project. So that is it for today. We have been able to build a basic HTML and CSS file that is rendering on our page, and also we have been able to accomplish hosting that particular application that we have built online. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video. And in the next video, this is what we are going to be building from start to finish. And we are not going to be boring you with the very things that you don't want. We're only going to be specific about using CSS layout that is going to make our work easier for the most part. So thank you so very much for watching. We hope to see you in the next course.